take him to Joint Base Andrews. He's flying off to West Virginia later tonight for a political fundraiser. I'm Wolf Blitzer. Welcome to the Situation Room. We're following lots of breaking news from the White House. The president declaring total victory, going on a tirade about the Russia investigation and the report of the special counsel, Robert Mueller, the former special counsel, I should say. The president says Democrats have hurt themselves badly today. He says that will play out dramatically in the 2020 vote. His comments follow 7 hours of testimony by Mueller before 2 congressional committees earlier in the day. Mueller defended his investigation into Russia's attack on the 2016 presidential election and allegations that President Trump obstructed justice, and he flatly contradicted President Trump, telling Congress his report did not exonerate the president, also declaring that his investigation was no witch hunt and Russia's election interference was no hoax. Our correspondents and analysts are standing by for full reaction to all the dramatic developments of the day. On edge before the hearings, President Trump, as you just saw, has undergone a truly dramatic change of mood. Let's go to our White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, you can see how the president is gloating right now. He thinks this is a huge victory for him and the Republicans.
And White House officials said to expect this as they were getting ready for the president to leave the White House, because they said he was going to come over, claim victory in front of reporters. And that's essentially what you see the president doing there as he spoke with us for about 30 minutes on the South Lawn just now. But Wolf, I've got to point out a few things that the president said. He seemed to misunderstand that correction that Robert Mueller made today during his second hearing, where he had an exchange with Ted Lieu earlier in the day, who said, was it correct that if not but for that OLC opinion that a sitting president could not be indicted, would they have indicted him? Mueller said that was correct. He later came back to say that is not what he meant to say, that he was saying that they did not make an assessment on whether or not the president committed a crime, due in part to that assessment, to that OLC guideline. The president seemed to misunderstand that when several reporters were asking if he has this concern that there's a chance he could be indicted for crimes once he's out of office. The president repeatedly going after reporters, saying that those were unfair and fake questions, even though he just seemed to misunderstand what that correction was. Secondly, the president spoke with reporters about how he did not sit down with Robert Mueller, something that Robert Mueller actually shed some light on today about why they didn't pursue that subpoena with the president, because he thought it was going to drag out the investigation. And you saw the president telling reporters there he thinks he made the right decision in not sitting down with the former special counsel. But overall, Wolf, the president's overarching theme here as he came out to reporters when he was asked about things that Robert Mueller said, including that his report did not exonerate the president now is claiming that Robert Mueller never had the right to exonerate him, even though, Wolf, you know, time and time again, the president has claimed this is a report that has exonerated him. All of this is part of the president's change in tone from just this morning, where he was calling people early in the hours before dawn, essentially talking about this, being agitated that Robert Mueller was going to be on Capitol Hill. But after seeing Robert Mueller's performance during that first hearing in front of the House Judiciary Committee, aides started to see a change in the president's mood, where he shifted from being irritated with the special counsel to triumphant and feeling that he's essentially gotten some sense of victory out of all of this.
Certainly did. That was the impression that we all got from the president. Clearly very, very pleased. Caitlin, I want you to stand by. I want to bring in our CNN legal analyst, Laura Coates, our crime and justice reporter, Shimon Prokopez, and our senior justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Evan, first of all, what do you think of what we heard from the president?
Well, Wolf, I think, the president said that Mueller just didn't have anything to work with, and I think that's not correct. I think it's clear if you read this, the 2 volumes of the Mueller report, there's a lot here. And Mueller today chose essentially not to use all of that. I think I understand that Mueller wants to sort of abide by this idea of staying within the 4 corners of what is the work product. But there's a lot of room there, and he chose not to do it. And I think, it's obvious that he was an unwilling witness. He warned the Democrats essentially that he didn't really want to be there. And he made that abundantly clear. But, on a couple of occasions, especially at the beginning, he made it clear that this was not an exoneration of the president. He also, in answer to a series of questions, said that once the president leaves office, it is possible that he could be indicted for some of his conduct. Again, those were some of the moments that we were able to get a few things out of Mueller. But on the big question one of the big questions going into today was this report essentially a referral to Congress to take this up and handle it in a way that the Justice Department is not allowed to, because this is a sitting president? Mueller essentially muddied the waters a lot today. I think he could have been a lot more clearer in some of his answers as to what exactly happened here with what the Russians did, and that is not okay, and what perhaps the solution would be for the political branches of government to do, and he did not do that.
Shimo, what did you think of Mueller's performance?
I think there were times when he struggled. Certainly, to me, it always seemed like he didn't have a good command of the facts, right? And this was something that I thought a lot about going into this hearing. Will Mueller have a good command? Will he know everything that's in this report? He was in charge of this investigation, so we expected him at times to be able to know exactly everything that's in this report. He ran this team. But it looked like many times he was struggling. He didn't understand a lot of questions. Yes, granted, some of the questions were convoluted. They were coming at him fast. And the Republicans were doing what, you see in a lot of trials. They were just trying to discredit him in any which way they could in an effort to try and essentially impeach him. So, I think the big thing here, I think the president makes a point here of this. And, this is a president who's all about performance. And so he's going to hone in on that. And a lot of people, I think, are going to hone in on the fact that the performance just wasn't what I think people expected.
It was a shaky performance. I think that's fair to say.
It is. And of course, he did not live up to the hype that the Democrats said he would be able to. Also, he did not do the heavy lifting that they wanted him to do in the sense of reading the report for them, having the perfect soundbite enunciated, and being able to bring color to this otherwise drab 448-page report. However, that failure does not belong to Mueller. That is more a failure of a strategy of the Democrats who were thought to hang their hats on this entirely. Remember, what did he do? He wrote a 448-page report with his overall team. Did he convey it in the way that would bring color to it? No, he didn't. But that report and all the information inside of it gave all the tools that Congress would have needed to act in any way they saw fit. They chose to wait for the televised performance to have the movie version be better than the book. It didn't work out for them.
They waited 3 months.
They waited 3 months to do so, and now they're suffering. Now they have that decision. They have to live with the consequences. This is their bed, and they're lying in it. The president, however, is hyperbolic in his statements about the great failure that it is, and saying that it was totally discredited. There's nothing to work with. There are 448 pages of information to work with. Certainly, their plan initially was to say, "Here, now that you've heard it, ta-da, everything's great." But in reality, he still said it's not a witch hunt. It's not a hoax. Russia's interfering with our elections. They're still doing it as we sit here today. They'll continue to do so unless you actually act on it. The president may have been compromised in respect of he had some financial thing to gain from an interaction with Russia in some way, shape, or form. Those are really good, meaty sound bites to have.
We shouldn't go away from today without emphasizing how much of a big deal it is, right?
Yeah.
You have a sitting president whose campaign knowingly encouraged the help of a hostile foreign power in interference in the election of 2016. And what the reaction so far has been from the political establishment is, certainly from one party, has been not a big deal. The other side, the Democrats, have just kind of been focusing on all kinds of other things. And in the end, nobody's really going to do anything about it. And so the bottom line is, if you're president of the United States, you can get away with anything. You can do anything you want. The president said that earlier this week. He may be right, because Mueller, nobody, it appears, is going to hold anybody to account. And
Shimon, the president said he did the right thing by refusing to testify, to answer questions directly with the special counsel and his team, because he said that team is a whole bunch of liars.
So his lawyers made the right decision, right? In here, and with the president, any good lawyer tells their client, don't do it. Don't go talk to prosecutors. Don't go talk to investigators. It was a smart decision. I think Mueller today said, look, I could have subpoenaed him if I wanted to subpoena them. And then he explained, much as he did in the report, why they didn't go through this. They didn't want to extend the time of the investigation. The other thing I want to point out is that Mueller did give the Democrats stuff to work with, right? In terms of the WikiLeaks stuff, the problematic in terms of the way the president described WikiLeaks. He said that's problematic is an understatement. The other thing, the questions that the president did answer, the written questions, he did say this, Mueller did say that generally that he did find that the president was not truthful. And I think that was a very significant moment. Of course, there's a lot of talk of, is Mueller going to walk this back now? But so far that has not happened. And I think that was a critical point in the afternoon's hearing.
We'll see if that happens. Go ahead.
And remember, this is a legislative body. He clearly said there is essentially a gap between what we know is wrong and what is actually lawful. Close the gap, legislative body. You are the law. If you don't act, anyone will remain above the law. The ball's in their court.
Yeah, he says it's up to the Congress right now. Stand by, guys. I want to go to Capitol Hill. Our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, is joining us. Manu, we just heard the president declare total victory. He's not necessarily going to have the last word, though, is he?
No, he's not, because Speaker Pelosi is going to address the media in just a matter of minutes, along with Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler, the two chairmen who presided over those back-to-back hearings. Now, she has been behind closed doors talking to her members in the aftermath of the Mueller hearing, and I'm told from a person who is in the room that she told her members that she respects what they have to do in terms of an impeachment inquiry. If they need to support one, she said essentially fine, do what's best for your district. She said that before they get there, we'll be moving forward with an impeachment inquiry, they need to have the best possible case in moving forward. And that's essentially what she has been saying for some time, that there are court actions that are taking shape. They need to pursue their current investigative route. We'll see what she has to say when she talks to the media, but behind closed doors, she's reiterating essentially what she has been saying for some time, but giving a green light of sorts to members if they do want to come out publicly and support an impeachment inquiry. Some have started to voice more support, potential support for an impeachment inquiry. One congressman who I talked to earlier today, Sean Maloney, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, had not supported opening up an impeachment inquiry, told me that it's, quote, unavoidable that they're going to have to get to the point of an impeachment inquiry. They're very close, and he said he's moving very much closer in getting behind such an idea. But not everyone is behind that idea. Another Democrat from a moderate district, from a swing district in New Jersey, a moderate freshman, Jeff Van Drew, told me this is not the time to move forward with an impeachment inquiry. He said, let's move on to other issues. And in order for the speaker to get behind opening up an impeachment probe, of course, she will need a groundswell of support, particularly from those freshmen from districts that the president had carried, people who empowered her to the House majority. If you start seeing more of those people flip, perhaps she also will flip. But at the moment, it appears that more people may call for an impeachment inquiry. Whether the speaker does, though, Wolf, is another question.
I will stand by, Manu, together with you for Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, to get her reaction. Adam Schiff is going to be speaking as well. In the meantime, let's go to a member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois, who did some of the questioning today. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You asked Robert Mueller if he was disturbed by Donald Trump's public encouragement of WikiLeaks during the 2016 presidential campaign. Let me play that exchange you had with Mueller.
This just came out, WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, October 10th, 2016. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You got to read it. Donald Trump, October 12th, 2016. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016. Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, November 4th, 2016. Would any of those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not certain I would say.
How do you react to them?
It's probably problematic is an understatement.
Mueller went on to say, Congressman, he was worried that kind of encouragement could give some hope or some boost to what is and should be, he said, illegal activity. What did you make of that response from the former special counsel?
It was nice to see him open up. I think he was a little reserved in the rest of this hearing. I think all this, it's important to remember, it's also on the heels of my reminding him that as CIA director, Mr. Pompeo called WikiLeaks a hostile intel agency. So we got to remember they're dangerous. They're a threat to the American way of life and our security. And here you have the President of the United States praising them, and I suppose now calling all that news fake news. So I welcomed the special counsel opening up. I think his years of law enforcement reminded him of how dangerous WikiLeaks is. He gave him an opportunity to say what the American public needed to hear.
Mueller was clearly disturbed by that kind of behavior from the Trump campaign, Congressman, but do you think he adequately explained his decision not to prosecute that kind of conduct?
Look, I have all the respect in the world for the special counsel. There's a few things that still trouble me. I thought he bent over backwards, not only not indicting the President of the United States, but refusing to come out in terms of whether or not he obstructed. He clearly could have done that. It was just, as he said, an abundance of fairness. He doesn't indict his son because he was ignorant of the law. And of course, and today he talked about this, he refused to subpoena the President of the United States because of time constraints. This is the most important investigation of our lifetime. And whether or not the President of the United States gets to decide whether he responds to a subpoena just because he'll act out poorly and fight this out in the courts, that was the wrong choice.
At times, it seemed like Mueller wasn't necessarily entirely familiar with sections of his 448-page report. Do you believe he had full command of the facts?
Look, this was a tough day for him. It's not just 7 hours in front of an often hostile audience. The first half of this was absolutely brutal. He had my Republican colleagues yelling at him for 4.5 minutes, and when he attempted to answer, they would interrupt him. They were extraordinarily disrespectful to him. They have absolutely no respect for someone who had, coming into this investigation, the highest credibility on a bipartisan basis, a war hero, and a true American.
You're among, at least by our count, 93 House Democrats who want to begin formal impeachment proceedings, but most lawmakers in your own party don't want to go down that path, at least not yet. Do you think Mueller's testimony today changed enough minds in your party to build momentum toward impeachment?
I think it begins organically from the public, and obviously we know that only about 3% of the American public had read the report before today. So the fact that they got 7 hours of reinforcement on that will certainly help. It takes a long time to move people, to move that needle. Obviously they're concerned about the frontliners in those districts where people haven't decided. And we also have to remember that a lot of this was poisoned by the fact the first time people heard about this report, it came from the Attorney General telling people, lying to the American public about what was in the report, saying that the president was exonerated. That's a lot to overcome. Never mind the 3 years in which the president obstructed the investigation and worked hand in glove with people like Chairman Nunes to defeat every effort to find out what took place.
The president, as you just heard, is taking a victory lap right now. He's saying this whole thing for the Democrats was an embarrassment, a waste of time. The Democrats hurt themselves very badly. He went on and on and on. Do you worry that the testimony today from Mueller may have backfired?
Look, if all you take from this testimony today was the fact that the Russians attacked our democratic process, and that process they invited. They incorporated the assistance they got from the Russians into their campaign plan. Nobody called the FBI. In fact, they attacked the FBI. If that helps the president, well, then our country has bigger problems.
Do you think Mueller's reluctance to go beyond the scope of his report underscores the need to bring in witnesses like the former White House counsel, for example, Don McGahn?
I think it does. I think the bigger part of that, well, look, this is the most important investigation report of our lifetime, but as important as that is what is not in there. And the special counsel referenced the counterintelligence information, the questions of the possibilities of money laundering. Was the President of the United States, or is the President of the United States compromised? That affects our national security. So that's why this still has to go forward. The fact that we were obstructed all along and the special counsel wasn't looking into the financial aspects tells there's still much work to do. I'd like to bring in the FBI director to get questions. What are they doing on the counterintelligence investigations? Where are they, and how are they affecting our national security?
So what's your strategy now? Where do you go from here?
Look, every day in this investigation is important, but it's like a football game when someone says, that was the most important play of the game, until the next play. The investigation continues because the work really matters. The issues of counterintelligence should come first.
All right, Congressman Quigley, thanks so much for joining us. Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. Once again, we're standing by to hear from the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, from the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. They're about to hold a news conference, make a statement. We just heard from the President. He was gloating. He was very pleased. He said this was a horrible day, a devastating day for the Democrats. The Democrats, he said, had nothing. And then he went on to say they had less than nothing. Let's bring in our political, legal, and national security experts to assess what's going on. And Dana, as we await to hear from the Speaker, there's dramatic reaction unfolding.
That's right. And as Manu was just reporting, the speaker called a very urgent last-minute meeting with members of her caucus, and his sources, my sources, the headline that we are hearing from them about her message was basically nothing new. I'm going to keep on keeping on. We're going to keep fighting in the courts. We're going to keep fighting to get key witnesses who have refused to come before us, like Don McGahn, who we heard a lot about today. And then we'll see what happens. That's really important because the base, people out there who were looking to this day, to this testimony as the game changer for not just public opinion, but Nancy Pelosi and other Democratic leaders' decision to say, finally, okay, we are going to begin an impeachment inquiry. They're not going to hear that unless something dramatic changes between now and, minutes from now when she takes that podium. They're not going to hear that. She is in the same place that she was. We're not there yet. But she also, as Manu said, according to his sources, said to the members in the districts who are hearing that groundswell, we've already seen 80 plus of them say, okay, we want impeachment proceedings to go ahead. Others may add to that because they're hearing that call back home.
Because as you saw, Bianna, a lot of the Democrats were disappointed in Mueller's performance today. They thought the movie would be better than the book, and they're not necessarily convinced it was.
Which is why the book is typically always better than the movie. I think Mueller himself sort of alluded to what his performance may look like, given the fact that he didn't want to be there from the get-go. A lot of what he said in those 9 minutes that we heard from him back in May was hopefully, according to him, what we would hear, and that's it. You did hear a lot from him today. I just think given the number of hours that he was sitting there, and with the exception of a few congressmen, it could really have all been left to Nadler and Schiff with regards to the most important and crucial. And I think at times when you saw Mueller on his game, moments. It was the exchanges that volleyed back and forth, in particular with Schiff. And it begs the question, and I've been wondering this since we knew the schedule, why it wasn't reversed, why Intel Committee wasn't in the morning, and why we didn't have Judiciary in the afternoon. Intel was clearly the area where Mueller was most passionate with regards to Russia infiltrating and attacking our election system. It seemed he was a bit nervous coming in to the Judiciary panel, and I think had we started the other way around, especially with the archivist storytelling, maybe things would have gone different. But look, he's very different from Donald Trump. He's not an attack dog. There were plenty of opportunities where he could have fought back, where he could have answered in response to some of the attacks that were coming from the Republicans. He chose not to. I think Donald Trump, the president, smelled blood, and that's why you heard what we did from him.
What did you think? Yeah.
No, I think that's right. You heard Adam Schiff kind of leading up to this Mueller testimony and hearing, essentially saying he wanted Mueller to bring this to life. And we didn't really see that today. I think Mueller was very reluctant, obviously, to come here. And I think we see today why that was. He at times appeared that he didn't know the report as thoroughly as he could. And he had his aide there who he didn't rely on as much.
His aide didn't say anything.
Yeah, he didn't rely on him really at all. But I think that was surprising, I think, to a lot of the public who, people, haven't really heard from Mueller aside from that statement he gave earlier. All we saw was sort of him on those videos where he looked and sounded like a different person in many ways. So I think that's probably shocking. I do think a lot of Democrats, so even base Democrats, have sort of given up on the idea of Mueller as savior and this idea that the general public is going to shift in terms of their feelings about impeachment because of what happened over these last 3 months. There was all of this kind of wrapped up in Mueller and in the report. And then when it came out, I think there was a sort of a reality that set in among many Democrats who were among the base.
So I'm going to disagree a little bit here. I agree that Robert Mueller wasn't especially charismatic, but I actually think what mattered today was not the performance of Robert Mueller. The guy was never going to get up there and sort of put on a big performance. That's just not who he is. The task for the Republicans was to attempt to discredit him in some way. Yeah, they throw him off his game a little bit, but I think fundamentally they didn't achieve that goal. The task of the Democrats was to refocus attention on the substance of the report, to make the case to the American people, to get the American people's attention about what is actually in that document. And I actually think that if you look at their performance today, they did a pretty good job of that. They used slides, they pulled out those key moments. Some of those exchanges really were incredibly compelling. And so, look, I know it wasn't sort of the game changer. Mueller didn't get up there and say, I would have indicted him or or some piece of information that might have dramatically shifted the conversation. That said, I think today was incredibly consequential. I don't buy for a minute that the president actually believed it was a good day for him. What was painted was a devastating portrait for the White House.
So I think if you look at the totality of it, and if you sat and watched from the beginning to the end and knew all the ins and outs and all the names and all of the specifics and the legal jargon that they were talking about, absolutely. But in today's Twitter age and the Trump Twitter age, I'm not so sure it translated.
And the buildup, too. I mean, if this had just come out 2 years ago, I think this would have been a bombshell. We've become so numb to all of this. A lot of what was in the report had been reported by stellar reporting from news organizations over the past 2 years. So none of it was as shocking as one would think and expect it to be.
Everybody stand by. I want to go to Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee. He's chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. So, were you disappointed, or do you believe Robert Mueller did accomplish what he needed to do today?
Well, he told a story to the American people based on the facts that were gathered over a 22-month-long investigation. We didn't expect to hear from Robert Redford. We expected to hear from Robert Mueller. And he is a Marine. He's a great American. He's a patriot. He's a talented law enforcement professional. And he laid out a devastating case that compares and contrasts with the lies that have been peddled by Donald Trump out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Donald Trump said the whole Russia thing is a hoax. Bob Mueller made clear that Russia attacked our democracy in sweeping and systematic fashion. Donald Trump said this whole Russian investigation is a witch hunt. Bob Mueller made clear that the Trump campaign at the highest levels welcomed Russian interference with the election that was designed to benefit Donald Trump. Donald Trump said that he was totally and completely exonerated. Bob Mueller made clear nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, there was substantial evidence that they uncovered of obstruction of justice committed by the president.
During your questioning of Mueller today, Congressman, you did lay out your case that President Trump obstructed justice, but Mueller told you he didn't necessarily subscribe to your legal analysis. Were you disappointed that he wouldn't give a clear answer on whether or not he believes the president committed obstruction?
It was important for him to acknowledge that the three elements of obstruction of justice that we laid out, an obstructive act, a connection to an official proceeding, and corrupt intent, were found in terms of the evidence that was laid out in the report. He didn't resist the questioning in that regard. He acknowledged that those elements had effectively been met. He declined to bring the three elements together at the end, but I didn't expect that to be done. The American people are going to have to decide whether his testimony speaks for itself.
Were you disappointed that Mueller wouldn't say whether or not the president would have been indicted if not for that longstanding Justice Department policy that a sitting president can't be charged or indicted?
That is effectively what he said. That's how I perceived his testimony. And again, Bob Mueller indicated he was going to stick to the script. But much of the script had not been brought to light to the American people because the overwhelming majority of the American people had not read the report, understandably, given that they are living day to day, week to week, check to check. And so that's why today was an important step forward. But it's just the beginning, not the end. We're going to continue to follow the facts, apply the law, and be guided by the Constitution.
Throughout both hearings, Judiciary and Intelligence, Mueller declined to answer a whole bunch of questions that lawmakers were asking him. In general, was he transparent enough, Congressman? Were you satisfied with his testimony?
We were satisfied with his testimony to the extent that we understood he was going to stay within the four corners of the report. And he didn't resist Democrats on either the Judiciary Committee or the Intelligence Committee when we pointed him specifically to the devastating findings that had been laid out in both Volume 1 and Volume 2, where again he repeatedly found instances of substantial evidence to suggest that the president engaged in obstruction of justice. And he also made clear that obstruction of justice is a serious crime that undermines the rule of law and the very fabric of our legal system in the United States of America. That was important.
By our count, at least 93, maybe 94 House Democrats support starting formal impeachment proceedings. Before today's hearing, you were not among those lawmakers. Did Mueller's testimony today change your mind?
Well, it's a building block in terms of determining the ultimate accountability that Trump needs to confront, based on the fact that we believe in America, no one is above the law, certainly not the President of the United States of America. As chair of the House Democratic Caucus, part of my job is to make sure that we embrace the opinions and perspectives of every single member within the caucus. We're in the process of having conversations right now about how to move forward.
So you haven't changed your mind, at least not yet, is that right?
Not yet.
What would it take for you to change your mind?
Well, again, we are going to gather all of the information necessary and then collectively decide how best to proceed in terms of accountability for this president and what is the right thing to do to promote the rule of law consistent with the Constitution and to make sure that we proceed in a fashion that keeps the country together.
Because you just said no one is above the law, including the President of the United States. So if impeachment is the only remedy for a president who breaks the law, why are you still so reluctant to join your colleagues in supporting a formal impeachment inquiry?
Well, Mueller seemed to make clear that there were at least two approaches. One, there is the congressional processes, as he put it, otherwise known as impeachment, to hold the president accountable. He also opened the door to the notion that upon completion of a president's term, that the president could then be indicted for crimes that were committed in office. There's a variety of different pathways to explore. We want to make sure that we do what the right thing is for this country.
I know you got to run. One final question. I want you to react to what we heard from the president just moments ago when he said this whole thing has been an embarrassment for the Democrats, a waste of time for the Democrats. The Democrats hurt themselves very badly. What do you say to the president?
The president hasn't been completely and totally exonerated. He's a complete and total embarrassment. And sooner rather than later, this long national nightmare that is the Trump presidency will be over.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's get back to Dana and the team over here. What do you think?
Well, the fact that he, who has been squarely in the lane of Nancy Pelosi on impeachment, is saying we're not there yet, that gives you a very good indicator of what we're going to hear from the Speaker herself very shortly. He sounds different from Jerry Nadler, for example, who chaired the first hearing today, who has been technically on board with the leadership, but privately, we've been reporting and been told for some time, has been more inclined to begin impeachment proceedings, which would happen in his committee. But the fact that he explicitly said, not yet, that we're hearing behind the scenes from our sources, there's no groundswell yet, that's likely what we're going to hear from the House Speaker, but she might put maybe a half a toe in further than she has before, given the fact that we've moved forward with the calendar and with the process hearing from Mueller.
Showing our viewers some live pictures coming in from where Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, will be coming in. I think she's going to be joined by Adam Schiff, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, maybe Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. They were holding the hearings today. We'll see what she has to say. That could be beyond a very significant.
Yeah, it could, but I agree with Dana, and especially after what we heard from Representative Hakeem Jeffries, I think that there is still more digging that they're wanting to do right now. They seem confident that there's more information that they want to get specifically from some star witnesses like McGahn. I think on the issue of obstruction, they still have a lot more questions there. And I think ultimately when it comes to the president's behavior with regards to his response to Russia attacking the U.S. election system is going to be the next front that they approach, because if there's any takeaway from what you heard today from Robert Mueller is that the Russians continue to attack, and they will likely attack in 2020. And not only the Russians, but specifically the Russians, and nothing to his satisfaction is being done to address that.
And the idea that he sort of fears this is the new normal, that someone could get away with taking information from a foreign power or using that information from a foreign power. I agree that Hakeem Jeffries there at some point said it's just the beginning, not the end. So for Democrats who might be disheartened by what they saw today, here he was, I think, rallying the troops, basically saying there's more to come. Whether or not that means bringing somebody like Don McGahn, who was very much the subject today of the questioning for Bob Mueller, because he was so crucial in terms of these allegations around the president obstructing justice. So we'll see. But I think he's a good soldier. I think he probably represents 2/3 of where Democrats are now in terms of impeachment and the impeachment inquiry.
Look, I think there is one thing that was incredibly interesting and consequential about what we saw from the Republicans today, and that's what that they were not disputing the factual assertions in Mueller's report. They were off talking about the Steele dossier, quibbling over the legal technicalities, but by and large, implicit in their questions was their assumptions that Don McGahn is telling the truth and Donald Trump is lying, that Jim Comey is telling the truth and Donald Trump is lying, right? That the Trump campaign was aware of the Russian efforts to interfere in the election, that they sought to actively encourage. They welcomed help from WikiLeaks. We saw them quoting those lines we saw the Democrats quoting those lines of the report back to Robert Mueller. We actually didn't see any effort by the Republicans to suggest that somehow Robert Mueller had gotten this story wrong. And to the extent that part of Mueller's mandate was to sort of come up with the common set of facts that all Americans are going to agree on moving forward, he appears to have actually accomplished that task, even on some of the most astonishing and consequential things that we see in that document.
Which is what Adam Schiff was really trying to focus on in his closing moments with Robert Mueller, saying the standard for this country cannot be so low that just as long as the president doesn't commit a crime makes everything okay. And I think he effectively conveyed that thought process as well.
The president has often said he had total exoneration from this investigation. Mueller made it clear today that is not true. Listen to this exchange he had with Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the committee. I'll read it to you. What about total exoneration? Jerry Nadler said. Did you totally exonerate the president? Mueller's answer, no.
That was the first Q&A exchange of the day, and still, I think, the most dramatic. In the first break, I said they probably could have ended the day's hearings right there and gotten what they wanted in terms of hearing from the special counsel's mouth the substance of what really matters to Democrats, aside from the meddling in American elections, which is obviously huge, but just on the obstruction question, that hearing from his mouth what it said in the report, and most importantly, the way it contradicts what we've heard from the president over and over again. No, he did not exonerate the president. Mueller would not go a step further, of course, despite Democrats trying many, many times in saying, but I do believe that he committed a crime.
And one thing we saw Democrats attempting to do was walk through all those statutory elements, getting Robert Mueller to say, yes, this element was yes, that element was met. Mueller tried to sort of say, now remember, that doesn't mean I'm agreeing with your overall characterization. Sort of, I see where you're trying to lead me here, and I don't want to play this game. But the message from Robert Mueller was not at all that he exonerated the president. The message from Robert Mueller was, it's your decision. It is this body's decision whether or not a crime was committed here. My work here is done. I have developed the factual evidence. I have developed evidence on every single criminal element. I've put it for you in a report, and I've put it on your desk, and I'm not going to do this work for you any longer. Now it's your turn to decide whether or not you are prepared to confront what's in this document and what it means for the future of this country.
Yeah, and that's always been the case, right? I mean, since this report was released, they have had all of this information. You had Mueller affirm what was in that report over and over again today, but it's going to ultimately be up to Democrats. What do they want to do? Can they keep sort of slow walking this in the way that they have been, essentially saying, we're waiting for more facts. We want a more compelling case. They have the case. I mean, it's there. I mean, Robert Mueller laid it out pretty convincingly in his report.
And I think that's a reason to be a little bit suspicious of sort of, do we know if there's a groundswell or not? By all indications, Nancy Pelosi has really been holding things off here. She's trying to keep it at bay. And so we're seeing more and more
it's
sort of
early.
members.
No, I think you're right. I think it's too, this just happened. We're going to see what happened. I think the issue is just on the way that this plays politically is that what you just said, Robert Mueller giving the message, okay, Congress, this is up to you. That was the message, but he never actually said that because that's not his way. Had he said that, which is what the Democrats who want this were desperate for him to say, here's my roadmap. I couldn't indict because constitutionally it's Congress that has to deal with the president of the United States. ball is in your court. He never went that far.
Which is not to say that this was a total victory either for Republicans, because what Republicans were really hoping to focus on was the origins of this investigation, right?
Here comes Nancy Pelosi. She's walking in, and it looks like Jerry Nadler. Yep, that's Jerry Nadler. He's there as well, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
Because the cameras are there. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. It's been a pretty interesting day, an historic one, as a matter of fact. A day in which the former special counsel affirmed in public what the Mueller report put forth. It is a crossing of a threshold in terms of the public awareness of what happened and how it conforms to the law or not. The president likes to have his poster that said the Mueller report took this many days, cost this much money, this, that, and the other. Well, we have a corresponding contradictory chart. Mueller investigation by the numbers. $40 million recovered for the U.S. government. Remember, he said how much it would cost? Less than that. 37 people and entities charged with crimes. 25 ongoing criminal cases referred, 7 convicted, including 5 top Trump campaign officials. And then he had no collusion, no this or that. 10 instances of obstruction, yes. No exoneration. That's some of what we heard today. I just want to go to another point, that at the same time as we're on this path of the Mueller investigation, to recognize that the Mueller investigation was prohibited from looking into the president's finances. And that is what our committees of jurisdiction have been doing. As we legislate for the good of the American people, we're also investigating so that we have the grist for the mill to litigate in court. And those cases we've won in lower courts. They, of course, appealed. We feel strongly about our position, about the position of Article 1, the legislative branch having the right to have oversight over every other branch of government. But that's important because it means we can get the information to show the American people what the obstruction of justice was further all about. I'm very, very proud of our committees, the Judiciary Committee and its great chairman, Jerry Nadler, the Intelligence Committee, great chairman, Adam Schiff. We're going to hear from them now. And we're also joined by Elijah Cummings, chair of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, a committee that is winning its courts in case as well. So I'm going to yield with great respect to all 3 of our chairmen, and then we'll take some questions. First, I'll yield to the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, the American people heard directly about what the special counsel investigation uncovered as to Russia's interference in the 2016 election and the president's cooperation with it and obstruction of justice. Mueller made clear that the president is not exonerated. Mueller found evidence of obstruction of justice and abuses of power by the president. The report said the president could be indicted for obstruction of justice after he leaves office. Mueller found that Trump would and did benefit from Russia's help, and that the campaign welcomed that help. Mueller found multiple instances where all 3 elements for charging criminal obstruction of justice were met: trying to fire the special counsel in order to stop the investigation, trying to have people lie and cover up for him for the same purpose, trying to limit or impede or constrict the special counsel's investigation, trying to tamper with witnesses, cooperating with investigators. All of these were found with great evidence. President Trump went to great lengths to obstruct this special counsel's investigation. Anyone else who acted in this way, if they were not the sitting president, would face criminal prosecution, would face indictments. Only the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion that you cannot indict a sitting president has saved or is saving the president from indictment, because all the elements of of these crimes were found with substantial evidence, and the people have now heard this. The president's chant of no obstruction is nonsense. His chant that he's been totally exonerated is a simple lie.
First of all, I want to thank Director Mueller for a lifetime of service to the country, from his days as a young Marine in Vietnam through his decades of service as a prosecutor, as the director of the FBI, and through his service as special counsel. This nation owes him an enormous debt of gratitude. So, Director Mueller, I want to thank you personally for all of your service. Today, the director outlined in powerful words how Russia intervened massively in our election, systematically in a sweeping fashion, how during the course of that intervention they made multiple approaches to the Trump campaign, and far from shunning that foreign involvement in our election, the Trump campaign welcomed it, made full use of it, put it into its communications and messaging strategy, and then lied about it. Lied about it to cover it up, lied about it to obstruct the investigation into that very attack on our democracy. Part of what I found so powerful about his testimony today was not just when he was asked about the law, but when he was asked about the ethics, the morality, the lack of patriotism of this conduct. And perhaps one of the most chilling moments, I think, in our committee was when he expressed the fear that this become the new normal. And of course, I think what is animating that fear of the director, what certainly animates it for me, is the fact even after the nightmare of the last 2.5 years, the President of the United States will still not forswear receiving foreign help again. That to this point, the President still continues to call this Russian attack on our democracy a hoax, something that Director Mueller today directly refuted. That he still calls a witch hunt, something that the Director Mueller today directly refuted. And so we go into this next election more vulnerable than we should be. We can't control completely what Russia does, although we must do everything we can to harden our election defenses, to make sure there are paper trails, to make sure that we deter and disrupt any kind of Russian intervention. But we cannot control that completely, but we can control what we do. And Director Mueller made it clear in no uncertain terms that it's up to us whether we act ethically and patriotically, whether we refuse to be a party to a foreign attack on our democracy. And once again, I thank him for his service.
Thank you. Elijah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I first want to applaud Chairman Nadler, and who heads our Judiciary Committee, and certainly our chairman of our Intelligence Committee, for what they did today in their committees. What they did was paint a picture for America. One of the most chilling things that I have noticed, that I've witnessed, is when a former member of our committee, Mr. Amash, a Republican, went to a town hall meeting and got a round of applause in a Republican district after he had said that he felt that the president should be impeached. But that wasn't the thing that got me. What really got me was when a lady at the end of the town hall meeting said, "I didn't know that there was anything negative in the Mueller report about President Trump." That says a lot. And to her credit, our speaker made it clear that we needed to paint a picture for America, so that they could fully understand what is going on. This is a critical moment in our country's history. Don't be fooled. And it is a moment which people will be talking about and reading about 300, 400, 500 years from now. And they're going to ask the question, what did you do when we had a president who knew the rules and knew that our founding fathers had done a great job of creating a constitution and had put in all the guardrails, but never anticipate that we would have a president that would just throw away the guardrails. And that's why what happened today is so critical. It was a giant step in making sure that the American people got a picture of all of this, and hopefully will look towards the future and say, we're not going to have this. Both Mr. Nadler and Mr. Schiff said something that's very critical. This isn't normal. And we're now getting so used to normal, to this kind of conduct by our president, and by the way, of our attorney general and our Republican colleagues, that it looks like people are just going to accept it. Well, we refuse to accept it. And then in my committee, we constantly, and I know Schiff and Nadler have heard this, people say, oh, you're just messing with the president because you don't like him. It's not about not liking the president. It's about loving democracy. It's about loving our country. It's about making a difference for generations yet unborn. That's what this is all about. And I'm begging the American people to pay attention to what is going on. Because if you want to have a democracy intact for your children and your children's children and generations yet unborn, we have got to guard this moment. This is our watch. And again, I am so very proud of the Judiciary Committee. I am so very proud of the Intelligence Committee, because they went in and tried to pull out the facts so that they could paint the picture so that America could see it. And hopefully they will not be ladies like the lady at Amash's town hall meeting, who says they didn't know that there was something wrong that Trump did with regard in this Mueller report. And so, again, the speaker is absolutely right. She told us a little bit earlier that she wants to gather all the information and make sure that we have everything we need to paint that picture. Now, what the American people do with that's another thing. But we will not stand by and fail to let them see the total picture. And I want to thank Mr. Mueller for coming forward for his service to our country. But last but not least, it is so interesting that when Mueller would make a decision that they liked, they said, oh, we love you, you're the greatest thing since ice cream. But then as soon as he says something they don't like, oh, you're a bum. Come on now. We have to see through that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, no, as we acknowledge the greatness of our chair, Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff, I also want to acknowledge the greatness of Elijah Cummings, the chair of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. He has really won the first case, the Mazur decision, which his research enabled us to take to court. We won the case. The decision was a complete, beautiful statement on the ability of Congress to have oversight. That's right. Just a remarkable decision. And now, of course, the administration is appealing it. But I thank you, too, Mr. Cummings, for your great leadership and where we're going next. Because, as you know, the Mueller investigation could not do the president's personal or business connections. And one of those connections could be to the Russians, and that's what we want to find out. So as we go to questions, I just want to say that I do believe that what we saw today was a very strong manifestation, in fact, some would even say indictment, of this administration's cone of silence in their cover-up. This is about the oath we take to protect and defend the Constitution. But some of the actions that the administration may have taken, we'll see through our investigation, may have jeopardized our national security by strengthening Russia's hand and interfering in our elections, undermining democracy not only in our country, but in other countries as well, upsetting our preeminence as a democracy in the world. This is very serious. Today was very important. Again, salute our chairman, all of our 6 chairmen who have been involved in this, and now we can take some questions. Okay, so who do you want to hear from first? You guys decide. Wait a minute, how about a new person? And Katie, okay, she's having a baby, we have to go there first. As a mother of 5, I feel.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, what you saw today, did it change whether or not you think the House of Representatives should launch impeachment proceedings?
My position has always been whatever decision we made in that regard would have to be done with our strongest possible hand, and we still have some outstanding matters in the courts. It's about the Congress, the Constitution, and the courts, and we are fighting the president in the courts.
Madam Speaker, to be clear here, isn't the issue, Madam Speaker, to be clear here. Madam Speaker, to be clear here.
Excuse me?
Can I just follow up? Some of your members told us over the course of today that they were expecting imminent action of some kind.
No, I don't know why they did.
What are the very
I don't know why they thought that. But they came to me and I said, I don't know why.
The very next step is the lawsuit.
Yeah. So, again, the lawsuits, as we have a number of lawsuits. You want to speak to that, Jerry? Please.
Well, the very next step, I'm not going to talk longer range, the very next step, either tomorrow or Friday, is we're going into court to enforce, to ask for the grand jury material and to enforce the subpoena against Mr. McGahn. And that's particularly important because the excuses, and I won't call them reasons, the excuses that the White House gives for McGahn not testifying, the nonsense about absolute immunity, et cetera, are the same excuses for all the other fact witnesses. And if we break that, we'll break the logjam.
Madam Speaker, what about, where do you stand right now? What do you need to know on impeachment to say, okay, we don't know enough yet?
Did I just not say we're waiting to hear from the courts? So we have our subpoenas in the court and the subpoenas are for information. And when we get that information, we can make a judgment.
So that will be the telltale sign about whether or not you.
Yeah, we have several considerations. It's about what information is there, and this isn't endless. This isn't endless. I understand that, but we have live cases in the courts. We have some that are going forward that Mr. Chairman Nather just mentioned. It isn't endless, but would strengthen our hand to get that information. Remembering that in the Watergate was when they got the information in the tapes that broke the case. So it wasn't just about changing public opinion. That helped change public opinion. But it's not about me. It's about our caucus. It's about our country. As I say, there's a cone of silence in the White House that is engaged in a massive cover-up in the obstruction of justice. Those obstruction of justice charges, as has been demonstrated today in the hearings, could be indictable offenses by anybody else, not the President of the United States and the President when he's no longer President. But the American people, I think that if we go down that path, we should go in the strongest possible way. And that's all I'm going to say about the subject. We have our distinguished chairs here.
Let me say something. And I know Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler would repeat what I'm saying. You know, the American people in the last election, even from Trump districts, said we want to make the president accountable. A lot of people loved him; they like him, but they want to make him accountable. And we have been stonewalled with regard to getting information, access to witnesses. And getting documents. All of us have. Remember, the president said, "I'm not. I'm not going to give you anything really." And so, again, the speaker is absolutely right. We're gathering information, and we are met with significant force, but we're plowing our way through. But all of that information, piece by piece, is like a mosaic, paints the picture.
Speaker Pelosi, but you have long said that there's no point in moving forward with an impeachment inquiry because Republicans control the Senate. It's going to die in the Senate. Is that no longer your
I have
chief
never
concern?
long said that. I have never long said that. If we have a case for impeachment, that's the place we will have to go. The fact that why I'd like it to be a strong case is because it's based on the facts and the law. That's what matters, not politics, not partisanship, just patriotism. I don't care. I'd like the Senate to be responsible and honor their oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution, to see the challenge this is to our national security, that the Russians trying to do to our country. But the stronger our case is, the worse the Senate will look for just letting the president off the hook.
Speaker Pelosi, even
after we have these great chairmen here who know so much. Please, I'm going to start asking them questions if you.
Even after these hearings, the president said he's completely exonerated, despite what Mr. Mueller said. So what have these hearings really changed?
Let me just say this. You give me the opportunity to say this, and then I invite my chairman to close. We want to have the strongest possible case to make a decision as to what path we will go down, and that is not endless in terms of time or endless in terms of the information that we want. But if it comes to a point where the cone of silence and the obstruction of justice and the cover-up in the White House prevents us from getting that information, that will not prevent us from going forward. In fact, it's even more grounds to go forward. My colleagues?
I just want to echo that. Martin Luther King said something that is in the DNA of every cell in my brain, particularly right now. He said, there comes a point when silence becomes betrayal. And we refuse to betray generations that are unborn and the American people. We're not going to betray them. And the more we're accumulating information and doing the best we can. Again, with a force as great, I don't know how many lawyers the president has, but he's got a lot of them. And they go against every single thing we do. And so, again, we're not going to betray America. We're going to do our part to make sure that we have a democracy that's intact.
Jerry?
The United States is a democracy. It must remain a democracy. A democracy acts through the elected officials with the consent of the people. The people cannot give that consent unless they know the facts. Today was a watershed day in telling the facts to the American people. With those facts, we can proceed. And we face a time of great danger. Richard Nixon said he thought that the president was a dictator. He said if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. President Trump echoed that yesterday. He said under Article 2, I, that is he, can do anything I want. That is a totalitarian picture, not a democratic picture. The United States must be saved from this. So we have to paint the picture of what's going on, a picture of someone who gladly accepted help from a foreign power interested in subverting our election, our democratic election process, and that's what it is, subverting our election process and taking the choice of our president to some extent away from the American people. That's what the Russians attempted to do, and that's what the Trump campaign welcomed them in doing. A president who engages in crimes, repeated crimes, to cover up these unpatriotic and dictatorial actions. And this cannot go on, and it's up to Congress to safeguard the Constitution, and we will do it.
As I mentioned today during our hearing, I think the story of the 2016 election is really a story of disloyalty to country, about greed and about lies. And if there's anything that I think symbolizes those three strands of the 2016 election, it was Moscow Trump Tower. It was this massive real estate project that the president was trying to consummate while he was running for president and concealing it from the country. This, I think, demonstrated disloyalty to the country. by deceiving the American people about this massive business opportunity he was seeking while he was running for president. It's certainly a vivid example of the greed of people involved with that campaign, and an ample demonstration of all the lies that permeated the campaign and its aftermath. That, to me, is the story of the 2016 election. We need to make sure that is not the story of the 2020 election. And I'll say this on the issue of impeachment, which I view in very much the same way as the Speaker. Maybe I'm just an old prosecutor, but before I brought a case to indictment, I wanted to make sure that I had the strongest evidence possible. I wanted to understand my case. I wanted to be able to make my case. Now, I tried an impeachment case in the Senate about 10 years ago, a corrupt federal judge who was convicted. So I have some understanding of what it takes to get a conviction in the Senate, and I have no illusions about getting a conviction in the Senate. But there are two juries in an impeachment. There is the jury, which is the Senate, which decides removal from office, and then there is the jury that is the American people. And I'm most concerned about the jury that is the American people. And before we embark on a course as significant to the country as the impeachment of a president, I want to make sure that we can make that case to the jury of the American people.
One of the guidance, I thank our distinguished chairman, so proud of all of them, but just following up on the last statement by Chairman Schiff, e pluribus unum, that's the guidance our founders gave us. They couldn't imagine how many we would be or how different we'd be from each other. They want us to remember that we are one. So when we go down this path, we want it to be as unifying for our country, not dividing. And that's why we want it to be the strongest possible case. President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. Well, in order for the public to have the sentiment, the public has to know. So I hope you will be messengers of the truth to the public. We think today was really a milestone in making that sentiment be more informed. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
And so there you have it. I'm Wolf Blitzer here in the Situation Room, where we've been following the breaking news of the House Democrats. As you just saw, they wrapped up a news conference, about a half-hour news conference, in the wake of Robert Mueller's testimony before the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees earlier in the day. The House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, just said she's sticking with her relatively go-slow approach to building a case for impeachment, the start of formal impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives against the president, President Trump. At the same time, and you heard him live here on CNN, he's claiming that the Mueller hearings were a complete victory for himself and for the Republicans. Leaving the White House just a little while ago, the president combatively dismissed what he called a ridiculous hoax. However, Robert Mueller told lawmakers specifically he did not totally exonerate the president, as the president has repeatedly claimed. And the former special counsel agreed that the president wasn't always truthful in answering questions. Let's go to our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, who was there at the Nancy Pelosi news conference. So we're getting a lot of reaction from these Democratic leaders.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of discussion about impeachment. This has been a topic that had actually been a significant one at a closed-door Democratic caucus meeting. And just moments ago, the Speaker making very direct comments about impeachment, making it clear it is not off the table. While this is not the immediate course of action, making it clear that she wants to get more information in the courts. How long that takes is still an open question. She said it would not be endless. And when I asked her directly about her contention for some time that the Republican-led Senate will not convict the president, making it unnecessary of sorts, or making it harder for the House to move forward with an impeachment proceeding, she pushed back and said that is not her standard, whether or not the Republicans go along with it. She said it's about getting information. But you have long said that there's no point in moving forward with an impeachment inquiry because Republicans control the Senate. It's going to die in the Senate. Is that no longer your chief concern?
I have never long said that. I have never long said that. If we have a case for impeachment, that's the place we will have to go.
So she has in the past said very clearly that the Republican-controlled Senate is a place where impeachment essentially would go to die because the Republicans are unlikely to take it up. That was part of what she has been saying for some time, but pushing back there, making it clear that that is not what she's concerned about is an interesting comment from the Speaker. She says she does want to see what the court proceedings eventually draw out in terms of information. Now, what that exactly means is unclear. Whether or not that just simply will delay things even further. Court proceedings will play out for some time. Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, announced that they are going to move forward on 2 lawsuits that they've been planning to move forward with. 1, to get grand jury information related to the Mueller probe, and 2, to try to compel the former White House counsel Don McGahn to turn over records and also to testify before his committee. But those court proceedings could take some time. So what does that exactly mean for the Speaker if she will actually move and green light an impeachment inquiry going forward? We do know that more members of her caucus are almost certain to come out and support an impeachment inquiry. She is not there yet, but signaling at least that she wants the courts to play out and see where that leads on the question of opening up an impeachment proceeding.
Yeah. And Adam Schiff, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, is not there yet either, as we just heard. Manu, I want you to stand by. Our political correspondent Sarah Murray has been following all the details of these hearings earlier in the day. Sarah, Democrats, they were clearly hoping Mueller would provide some damaging testimony about the president. Did they get what they wanted?
Well, Wolf, I don't think they got the bombshell they may have been hoping for. They didn't even get a straight answer about whether the president committed a crime, whether this was meant to be an impeachment referral. Instead, they got something of an uneven performance by Robert Mueller.
With their prize witness on the stand,
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of
Democrats tried to drive home President Trump's alleged misconduct.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what about total exoneration? Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
Former special counsel Robert Mueller neutered Trump's favored lines of defense.
There was no obstruction and none whatsoever. And it was a complete and total exoneration.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
But Mueller may have failed to deliver the sparks Democrats hoped for.
Was the point of this hearing to get Mr. Mueller to recommend impeachment?
That is not a fair point of inquiry.
Mueller offered halting answers, often responding with one word and frequently citing back to the more than 400-page Russia report. Critics of the special counsel tonight questioning parts of his performance and how well he knew his own report.
Robert Mueller didn't appear to have a good grasp of a report that he authored.
One questionable moment came after Mueller suggested the only reason Trump wasn't indicted is because he's a sitting president.
I'd like to ask you, the reason, again, that you did not indict Donald Trump is because of OLC opinion stating that you cannot indict a sitting president, correct?
That is correct.
Later, Mueller clarified.
We did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime.
Still, it's clear Justice Department guidelines that a sitting president cannot be indicted weighed heavily on Mueller's decision-making.
You had an obligation to either prosecute or not prosecute.
Well, generally that is the case,
right.
Although most cases are not done in the context of the president.
Could you charge the president with a crime after he left office?
Yes.
Mueller also wouldn't say whether he intended for Congress to pursue impeachment proceedings.
You never used the term raising to impeachable conduct.
Our mandate does not go to other ways of addressing conduct.
And even though Mueller believed he had the authority to subpoena Trump,
we understood we could subpoena the president.
He decided the inevitable delay wasn't worth it.
We decided that we did not want to exercise the subpoena powers because of the necessity of expediting the end of the investigation.
Mueller was more expressive in his concerns over foreign powers interfering in U.S. elections. He appeared disturbed by Trump's prior praise for WikiLeaks.
Problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays, in terms of giving some, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
And worried that future campaigns won't feel any duty to report foreign election meddling to authorities.
I hope this is not the new normal, but I fear it is.
For their part, Republicans scoffed at the investigation.
It's time for the curtain to close on the Russia hoax. The conspiracy theory is dead.
and pressed Mueller on its origins, particularly the dossier, which is under investigation by the Justice Department.
You had 2 years to investigate. Not once did you consider it worthy to investigate how an unverified document that was paid for by a political opponent was used to obtain a warrant to spy on the opposition political campaign. Did you do any investigation in that whatsoever?
I do not accept your characterization of what occurred.
What would be your
I'm not going to speak any more to it.
While Republicans aimed to discredit Mueller, attacks on his team drew the strongest pushback.
We strove to hire those individuals that could do the job. I've been in this business for almost 25 years. And in those 25 years, I have not had occasion once to ask somebody about their political affiliation. It is not done. What I care about is the capability of the individual to do the job and do the job quickly and seriously and with integrity.
Now, Wolf, where Mueller was a little bit more uneasy talking about obstruction, he was much more forceful when he was talking about foreign interference in our elections, saying in some circumstances it is a crime to accept that kind of foreign election assistance. But he also seemed resigned when he said he hopes that this is not the new normal, but he's afraid that it might be.
Good point. All right, Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah Murray reporting. We just heard a little while ago from the president. Our White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins, was among the reporters asking him questions about the Mueller testimony as he was leaving the White House for a fundraiser. Caitlin, the president, he clearly was fired up.
Yes, he was, Wolf. And White House officials said before the president even came out to speak to reporters that he was in a good mood. And he made that pretty clear as he was speaking to us about how he saw things that unfolded on Capitol Hill today.
Look, I think Robert Mueller did a horrible job, both today and with respect to the investigation. But in all fairness to Robert Mueller, he had nothing to work with. You know, you can be a builder, but if they don't give you the right materials, you're not going to build a very good building. Robert Mueller had no material. He had nothing to work with. So obviously he did very poorly today.
Now, Wolf, that is not the attitude the president had when he got up this morning, when my sources said he was calling people, talking to them, agitated about the fact that Robert Mueller was about to be on Capitol Hill. But now, after that performance, the president feels that the optics were in his favor today because he didn't think that the former special counsel had the performance he was fearing he was going to have, talking about the unflattering aspects of this report. So even though the facts of this report are no different, with the president now saying that even though before he's relied on this report to say he was exonerated, now saying that Robert Mueller doesn't have the right to exonerate anyone, the president is viewing this as a win, and he sees it as successful because he feels like Republicans were able to successfully turn the tables on the special counsel, on the FBI and the DOJ overall, and that's not what he was expecting when he went into today.
Caitlin Collins at the White House. I want you to stand by as well. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Pamela Brown, our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. They've been covering the Russia investigation from the beginning. We're also joined by our senior legal analyst, Preet Bharara, the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. So the president is declaring, Preet, a complete victory today. Is that what you heard from the Mueller testimony?
It's not shocking that the president has a conclusion that doesn't match what the testimony is, just like he had a conclusion that didn't match what the report said as an underlying matter. Bob Mueller, and I've heard people on social media and elsewhere making snarky comments about whether or not he was quick enough or sharp enough or forceful enough. The fact remains that the report was not undermined a whit today. The report that said that Donald Trump engaged in all this conduct, which to my mind, but for the Office of Legal Counsel opinion, would mean that the president could be indicted, that all stood up. You had dozens of Republican members of the House ask question after question after question with a lot of gusto to try to get Bob Mueller to back off on them, and he didn't. In fact, many of the questions went to issues that are collateral and peripheral, but very few people engaged with the conclusions in the report, the facts in the report, and all sorts of other things in the report that talked about the ways in which Donald Trump probably broke the law. And that remains. And so if someone thinks that Bob Mueller, right out of the box, makes a statement about how he did not exonerate the president, which undermines the falsehood that the president has been saying for a long time, and all the other conclusions in the report remain unscathed, I don't know how you call that total victory.
And he specifically also, Jim Sciutto, he made it clear that he believes the president potentially could be charged, indicted after he leaves office.
He did. So much attention today on how Bob Mueller said the things he said, less attention on what he said. But let's just tick through a few of them to echo Preet's point here, but specific to Russian interference. He made clear that the president welcomed Russian interference and lied about it. He made clear that his encouraging of WikiLeaks was problematic. In fact, he said problematic was an understatement. He said that Russia interfered to help Trump because it believed it would benefit from Trump's victory. That's something that the current Attorney General says he's investigating, that portion of the intelligence community's conclusion. But Mueller said, in his view, that's the case. And this is also important. He said that interference is taking place as we sit here today, that we've looked at 2016. Russia continues to try to interfere in the election. What is the president of the United States doing to prevent that interference? There was no discussion of that today. In fact, the special counsel made clear that the president has raised the possibility of making that easier by making accepting foreign help the new normal. The president has said very publicly, well, listen, if someone comes to me with information, I might very well accept it. So on the issue of Russian interference, in the midst of what may have been a halting testimony at times, what he actually said, the substance of what he said at the substance of this report, which is about Russian interference in the election, the president aided and abetted. Whether it was criminal or not, no, but he aided and abetted and is not standing in the way of it today. That's damning.
That's an important point. Pamela, the president said Mueller did a horrible job today. You heard him completely rail against Mueller in his comments over at the White House. Who was a more effective messenger, though, today, the president of the United States or the former special counsel?
Well, I think bottom line is that Robert Mueller, he didn't really want to be any sort of messenger for anyone today. You know, he was a reluctant witness. He didn't want to do this. He made that very, very clear. And what was clear to me, and that there were certainly times that he didn't have command of the material, but also that he wasn't trying to sort of play politics or help one side or the other or play along or take the bait. He seemed to be very committed to staying within the four corners of the report and not playing politics. President Trump, on the other hand, this is all marketing for him. You know, he's trying to frame it a certain way as a win for him. You know, they seize on certain parts, such as when Robert Mueller said that his investigation wasn't impeded, even though it is still, you know this, a crime to endeavor to obstruct justice. You know, he seized on certain parts and tried to frame it as a win. And I think the bottom line is that people's views, in large part, were pretty much set before, and they will continue to be, you know. And I think you heard that from Nancy Pelosi even today, that this didn't move the needle in terms of impeachment for the Democrats.
The former special counsel repeatedly referred to the Office of Legal Counsel guidelines over at the Justice Department that a sitting president can't be charged, can't be indicted. If not for those guidelines, do you think the president would have been charged, indicted?
I do. I believe that to be so. I mean, we sat around this morning after the Judiciary Committee hearing concluded, and to a person, I think, around the table, myself included, we thought that it was very significant the way that the former special counsel answered a question from Congressman Ted Lieu that basically said, the reason you didn't indict the president was because of the OLC opinion. Is that correct? And he said yes. Now, he walked that back later. But there are all sorts of indications that what he lays out in the report is clear evidence, maybe not in all 11 instances, but in a number of the instances where all the elements seem to be made out and laid out in great detail, that those would constitute obstruction of justice, and that Bob Mueller has gone out of his way, bending over backwards, notwithstanding the attacks he gets from the president and the president's allies, to be fair to the president in light of the OLC opinion. And although there's this weird back and forth about whether or not, but for the OLC opinion, would he prosecute the president, I think based on the evidence in the report, based on the oddity of saying we're not exonerating the president, and some of that has come under criticism, which is arguable. And then the way he answered the question with Ted Lieu, I think a couple of times, to me indicates that but for the legal counsel opinion, he would indict the president, even though he's not comfortable saying that in a straightforward way.
What's going to be the impact on campaigns now down the road when a foreign government or a foreigner says, I have dirt on your opponent?
Listen, the president said he would accept it. You've had sitting Republican lawmakers say that they would accept it under some circumstances. And if they say it and they feel they're not going to face criminal charges, as this investigation showed, then this may very well be the new normal. And those were damning words, and I think disturbing, sobering words. It should be to Americans to hear the special counsel say, I fear that is the new normal. The law is clear on this. The law says accepting things of value from a foreigner is illegal. It's hard to prove that in a court of law. This special counsel did not prove it about the president, but this may be the new normal for us.
Everybody stand by because I want to bring in Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro of Texas right now. He's on the Intelligence Committee. He was asking questions earlier in the day. Congressman, thanks for joining us. So you saw Mueller explain that from the outset his team ruled out the prospect of charging President Trump based on Justice Department guidelines. Based on what you heard today, do you believe President Trump would have been indicted if not for those Justice Department guidelines?
Yeah, I believe that if Donald Trump was not sitting in the White House, that he would be sitting in a courtroom and he would be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. I also think it's very telling that Bob Mueller in his report and in his testimony today said that they didn't find sufficient evidence on conspiracy. He didn't say the same thing with respect to obstruction of justice. In fact, he was very clear that the president was not exonerated. So it affirmed my belief that the special counsel's report essentially served up to Congress the job that it needs to do in opening an impeachment inquiry.
But you also saw Mueller, he did have to go back and clarify his comments specifically. He says that his comments did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime. It's very different than saying they were ready to charge, but for the OLC ruling, isn't it? When he had to go back and clean that up.
On Ted Lieu's question,
yes.
Yeah, I think he's obviously being very cautious and very careful, and he's trying not to do the job of Congress. It's clear that if something is going to be done, if there's a process that's going to be undertaken to charge the President of the United States who's sitting in the White House, that Congress has to do it, and he believes that it wasn't his job.
So where do you think this goes from here?
Well, I think that in the coming months, you'll see a growing support for opening an impeachment inquiry. That doesn't mean that automatically people will say we should impeach the president, but that more and more people will believe that there should be an inquiry opened up, a process opened up to make that determination.
You heard Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, say, basically reiterate her relatively go slow approach. It's not yet time to begin formal impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives, despite all that we heard right now. You disagree with her?
Well, I have great respect for the speaker and, of course, her perspective. And look, ultimately, it is her decision about whether we start an impeachment inquiry or not. But we've seen the number of Democrats who support opening that impeachment inquiry continue to grow. And I believe that that will just grow larger in the coming months.
Congressman Castro, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's dig deeper with our experts and our analysts. And Gloria, you were listening to all 7 hours of that testimony earlier today. Do you think that testimony really is going to have an impact in changing the speaker's decision?
Well, you heard her. I mean, she made it very clear she wants the legal process to continue. She didn't jump at the notion of impeachment any more than she has in the past. She didn't say, we're ruling it out. She just said, as I think Adam Schiff said, you want to have the strongest case. And she knows where her caucus is. She also knows that she's got these 30 or so moderate Democrats who won in Trump districts that she needs to protect. But she didn't rule anything out. She hasn't ruled anything out in the past, and she didn't rule anything out today.
How did you see it?
So I think the Democrats got a little bit of what they wanted, but they didn't get what they really needed, which was a narrative. In the morning, there was some strong questioning by Congressman Johnson from Georgia. In the afternoon, I think Congresswoman Demings from Florida, the former Orlando police chief, got some good information out of Robert Mueller. But I don't think this changed the facts on the ground. I don't think this is going to move public opinion that much. And I don't understand why it took them so long to get this, if that's all they got.
What was your bottom line, Jeffrey Toobin?
I think things are pretty much exactly where they were in the morning. I mean, I don't think the people who were for impeachment got a great victory. I don't think the people who are against impeachment will change their minds much at all. I think if you were familiar with the Mueller report, as journalists tend to be, you didn't learn very much. But most people are not that familiar with the Mueller report. So if you heard for the first time Robert Mueller say, the president was not exonerated, we did not exonerate him, that's actually a big deal. But it is something that is in the report itself. And this is a demonstration, I think, of the importance of television versus a 440-page report.
I want to get some quick reaction from Republican Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee. He was asking questions today. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. You heard the president a little while ago declare a complete victory, but it was apparent today that Mueller didn't clear the president on the question of obstruction of justice. Would President Trump, do you believe, have faced charges if not for the fact that you can't indict a sitting president?
No, not at all. I mean, Mr. Mueller came back and corrected himself because there was some confusion about that. But in our committee, subsequently, he said twice that wasn't the reason why he didn't recommend or press forward with an indictment. It just simply wasn't. But, well, I mean, just wasn't anything terribly surprising out of this committee. I mean, if you remember Oliver North, I mean, all of us remember that hearing. And there's been, after the 9/11 hearings that we all remember, I think a month from now, no one's going to remember this hearing because there wasn't any surprises, certainly no bombshells, and not very much drama.
Obviously, Mueller clearly said the president could face charges once he leaves office, once he's no longer a sitting president. When the president claims victory today, is that more of a political victory than potentially a legal victory?
Well, I think that's a fair description, and I don't know why or for what cause he would face charges after this. I think there's a lot of speculation in that. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Wolf, this really is a political endeavor we're involved with here. It's not so much legal because there are no legal proceedings pushing forward regarding the president. But I got to say this as well. I think the person who's most relieved tonight is probably Nancy Pelosi, because this took the air out of the sails for this push for impeachment. I think she sincerely believes it would be bad for her party if they were to push forward on that. I think it jeopardizes their chances of her remaining speaker or electing a Democratic president in 2020. And I think the American people after today, I think, are even less interested in proceeding on impeachment than they were yesterday. And they weren't very interested in it yesterday. The polling on that is pretty clear.
Your committee, the Intelligence Committee, Congressman, was clearly focusing in on Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Putting aside the president's conduct, is Russia's attack on our election an important area for your committee to address?
Absolutely. And Wolf, thank you so much for asking that question. I mean, absolutely it is. And by the way, it's not just Russia, China and others are as well. The House Intelligence Committee released our report more than a year ago. Part of the reason was we had 47 recommendations that we felt we needed to start to implement so that we could protect ourselves in 2018 and in 2020. The foundation of our democracy is built on this idea that the American people feel like the vote is not manipulated, that their vote counts and that it's not changed. And if we lose that faith in our electoral process, if we lose that faith in democracy, this whole thing crumbles, and we have to restore that trust.
So, I was going to say, Congressman, with all due respect, you believe that this is a real serious problem facing the United States, Russian interference. So why did you use your limited time today to attack Mueller's team instead of finding out what could be done to protect America from Russian cyber warfare aggression?
Well, part of the reason, because I know what needs to be done. Once again, we spent more than a year looking at this, and we had our 47 recommendations. So there wasn't anything that he was going to tell me that we didn't already know. And I didn't attack Mr. Mueller. I mean, there's some concerns that we had that, once again, there were a multitude of leaks, 25 leaks, and we probably could have found more that came out of the special counsel's office. They all were disparaging towards the president. American people look at that and see, that doesn't seem fair that he's conducting this investigation and we have these selective leaks. And I just wanted him to have a chance to respond to that and say, yeah, it was concerning to me. These are the steps that we took to try to correct that. But, we never got to that point, and I wish we would have been able to get a response.
But how do you know that those leaks, and I've been a reporter for a long time, and leaks come from all sorts of sources. You never know directly unless the reporter specifically says where that information is coming from. How do you know? Do you have any evidence that those leaks were coming directly from Mueller's team?
Well, in almost every one of these cases, and maybe all of them without reviewing them in my mind very quickly, but in most or nearly all of these cases, the reporters quote someone close to the special counsel's office, and they were information that only the special counsel would have had. He was operating independently. He was conducting and interviewing people on his own accord, not in conjunction with the Department of Justice, not in conjunction with Congress. He was doing that on his own. He was the only one, and when I say he, and I want to to be clear on this. I'm not attacking Mr. Mueller. I'm certain he didn't leak a single thing. But someone in the office did, and it was information that only they had available. So it's just a fair presumption to say, yeah, it came from the special counsel because the reporters indicated it did, and they are the ones that had the information, and usually the only ones that had the information.
Well, I will point out, as a reporter who's covered these kinds of stories over the years and done a lot of reporting in these areas, when someone from the special counsel's office, for example, goes out and interviews someone, that individual, who may be an innocent individual, that person has that information as well, and that person can give a journalist some critically important information to pursue. I'll just point that out. So you never know for sure where that information is originating from based on these kinds of situations. But let me get to another sensitive issue, Congressman, while I have you. Mueller testified that he fears that the Trump campaign may have created, in his words, a new normal by not reporting outreach from the Russians. Is that true? Would you, for example, accept dirt from a foreign source?
Well, no, and I think we pretty much established that that's a terrible idea. And this idea of a new normal, it concerns me, Wolf. I think it concerns a lot of Americans, and not just in this area. There's so much about the last election where we seem to tear down standards and ideas that we've held for, maybe since our inception, for our history, and so many of them got pushed aside. And I think we've got to pull back from that. We've got to put up some of the guardrails that just seem to have been shattered in the last few years.
Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
All right, let's get back to our panel. And, Sabrina, as we watch all of this unfold, lots of unanswered questions. And the big question right now is, where do the Democrats go from here in the House of Representatives?
Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi wouldn't really say if this has moved the needle on impeachment. In fact, she signaled that her position hasn't changed, and she was echoed by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, who said that they want to have all the facts and to be able to build a case before the American public. Some news that Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, did make was saying that Democrats do plan to go to court to enforce that subpoena of former White House counsel Don McGahn. Of course, their efforts to have him testify have been stymied by the Trump administration, and they also plan to go to court to access grand jury information. But I do think this is going to be a real challenge for Democrats because, to Jeffrey's point, not all of the American public was following every twist and turn of the Mueller investigation. And so for him to sit there and to connect all of the dots, even if it's an understatement to say that he didn't do it in the most evocative way, that had some impact when you think about the fact that he laid out the extent of the contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians in 2016. He did not exonerate the president of obstruction of justice, and he reiterated many of the episodes or confirmed the episodes in which the president explicitly sought to impede the investigation. Democrats have to look at that on the substance and weigh how they want to proceed with what the testimony Mueller provided today.
So Jim Baker, where do you think Congress needs to go right now based on what we heard today?
Well, I would start with what they have in front of them already. Look, they're about to go on recess. They'll come back in September. But during the month of August, I think they need to plan a series of hearings, starting right away on securing our elections for the future, which means in part that they need to look back and try to figure out what happened. And so you can call people in, you can have public hearings about that and discuss what did we learn from the past and how do we apply those lessons to the future. That's one. And then also looking at tightening up the laws around obtaining things of value from foreign sources, especially. That was an issue in the Mueller report. They said the law was a bit unclear in certain respects. Okay, fine. We'll go back, hold some hearings that are directly focused, for example, on the meeting at Trump Tower in June of 2016. Focus on that. Figure out, look at the Mueller report. How do the laws need to be changed? You could have a bunch of hearings on that. You don't need to wait, in my opinion, you don't need to wait until you have an impeachment inquiry to start putting this information in front of the American people in a variety of ways. And I think they could do that right away.
It's interesting, Ryan Leza, the president today made it clear when he was asked if he regretted not sitting down with Mueller for a formal question and answer session. He only did it in writing. The president says he did the right thing. Did he?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Mueller seemed not to be when he was asked about that today, Mueller did not make a big deal out of the fact that they didn't interview the president and thought that they could finish the investigation without that interview, right? He didn't pause to relitigate that. I think the problem for this hearing was the expectations that Democrats set. One staffer the other day said that, nobody reads the book, so we're going to turn this into a film or something to that effect. Well, this was not, this was one of the worst screen adaptations that I think any of us have seen, because the witness himself was not interested in any way in dramatizing quite frankly, a very dramatic material in the report. And so, Mueller, as Congressman Castro pointed out a few minutes ago, Mueller is just not interested in doing the Democrats' job for them. If they want to convince the American people that the evidence in this report justifies pursuing impeachment, Mueller was not there to make that case. If they want to turn some of the raw material, some of the facts of the investigation into something made for TV drama, Mueller was not there to do that for him. He's basically saying, I gave you guys the information. You're Congress. It's your job as an independent branch of government to pursue impeachment. So I think they let expectations get way out of hand with what they could get out of this hearing.
For
hearings.
For Donald Trump, this was about Donald Trump. This wasn't about election interference. This wasn't about the larger issue of how to save our democracy. This was about how he saves himself. And that's all he cared about today. And what he came away with, if you look at his assorted tweets, well, the guy didn't lay a hand on me. He didn't. He couldn't. But what he doesn't get is that Mueller wasn't punching. He wasn't punching him, because what Mueller was concerned about, and he said it over and over again, was, as he called it, a living message that he was giving to the American public, was they are doing it right now. Not just Russia, but others who are trying to interfere with our election. I mean, he threw shade at Donald Trump and his team. He said that his investigation was hampered by their lies. He said that Donald Trump's tweets about Wiki was problematic, is an understatement. They were disturbing and subject to investigation. But his whole point was sort of, okay, I threw a little shade at Trump, but that's over for me. What I care about is what they sent me to investigate, which is the attempts to influence the election, which are ongoing. And not one comment from the president or his team about the need to fix that, about the need to delve into that. And that was his message. And the president, it seems to me, didn't care about it.
But there was one dramatic moment, and we were all watching this together, and our ears perked up. The president, as you know, did answer written questions in the course of this investigation, questions raised by the special counsel. But the special counsel today, the former special counsel Robert Mueller, suggested that they may not necessarily have been all that truthful. Listen to this.
Director Mueller, isn't it fair to say that the president's written answers were not only inadequate and incomplete because he didn't answer many of your questions, but where he did, his answers showed that he wasn't always being truthful?
I would say, generally.
How do you interpret that?
Well, I mean, it was a peculiar exchange. I mean, if you look at the transcript and see what Congresswoman Deming said and the answer, it's that generally the president's answers were untruthful, that he lied to him under oath. If that's true, that would be very inconsistent with how he answered all the rest of the questions over the course of the day. So I'm not sure that means what we think it means. But if it is a pretty extraordinary statement that the president lied under oath in the Mueller investigation.
Which potentially is a crime. Jim Baker, you're the former general counsel at the FBI. How did you interpret that?
Well, two things. One, I mean, I guess my assessment was, as a prosecutor, Mueller assessed, look, I'm probably not, I have a lot of evidence already. I'm probably not going to get truthful information from the president. If I try to litigate this and he's going to fight it, it's going to take me forever. And at the end of the day, I'll end up with information that doesn't really help me advance my case, other than perhaps some type of perjury charge with respect to the president. But I think he just assessed that it's a big waste of time. Having said that, I mean, just backing up, as someone who was involved in the Hillary Clinton email investigation, the notion that we could have closed that investigation without talking to Hillary Clinton, I mean, people would have lost their minds, right? I mean, they'd lost their minds. They didn't like the way we did it anyway. But putting that aside, if we had tried to if she had resisted and we tried to close the investigation without talking to her, getting her under oath, I don't think the public would have accepted that. And I'm quite confident Donald Trump would have been very angry about it.
Let me get your thought, Jim Baker, because you know Mueller, you worked with Mueller, you know Comey, the fired FBI director. At one point, the president keeps saying, you know what, I invited Mueller in for an interview. He wanted to be the FBI director. I said no. And today we heard Mueller say he went in there just to give the president some advice. He wasn't trying to become the FBI director. He had been the FBI director for 12 years.
For 12 years, right. I think he had enough of that, exactly. And if I could just add, well, if I just had the floor for 1 second, I mean, let's just step back. The role that Bob Mueller played post 9/11, starting on the day of 9/11, and I was with him on 9/11, and for years after that, Bob Mueller is substantially responsible for protecting the American people through that very difficult time. And he made a big difference and is part of the reason why there was not another attack on the United States. So I think all these comments about him and so on and so forth and some of the slams at his integrity over the past few days or so on is just really inappropriate and doesn't give him credit for what he did to protect the country both after 9/11 and obviously serving during Vietnam as well.
Looking back, David Swerdlick, now on this important day, 7 hours of testimony from Robert Mueller. Did the Democrats succeed? Was it a good idea for the Democrats to press and press and press to get Mueller before Congress?
It probably would have been a good idea to press and press a couple of months ago. Again, like everyone has said, some information came out. If this was a bingo game, they filled some of the spots on their card, but I don't think they gave the American public a through line here. Part of that is on the way they questioned Special Counsel Mueller. I don't think it was always effective. It was only effective in spots. Part of it was on Special Counsel Mueller. There were some instances where it made complete sense that he didn't want to go outside the four corners of his report. Some of the other questions where he was asked, for instance, is flipping an important part of law enforcement, and he declined to answer that made no sense to me. There were instances where he could have gone out there and simply said, hey, listen, Congressman, you dragged me out here. Let me answer your question. Now, I know everybody who knows him says that's not the way he operates, but at some point, if he thinks it's important for the ball to move forward on this, I think he could have leaned in a little bit more.
And I think in some ways the format was flawed. There were times when Robert Mueller was trying to expand on his answer, but because of the time limits, they would move on to the next lawmaker, and therefore they would be on to another point of discussion. Look, there's going to be a lot of talk about whether or not Democrats got everything out of this hearing that they wanted, in part because it wasn't really a made-for-TV kind of moment, and that's just because that's how Robert Mueller operates. He was never going to come out with the kind of flair that James Comey had when he testified before Congress. But one of the most effective exchanges, in my mind, was when House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff used his 5 minutes to really have Mueller piece together exactly what was going on in the 2016 election and really did build that through line where the Russians are trying to swing the election in Trump's favor. The Trump campaign was receptive to that help. When offered dirt on Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump Jr. said, if it's what you say, I love it. Meanwhile, then candidate Trump was openly calling on the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton's emails. He was pursuing a lucrative business deal in terms of the Trump Tower Moscow project. He praised WikiLeaks for releasing those stolen emails that were, of course, hacked by the Russians from the DNC and Hillary Clinton. And so he really did paint a picture first of the contacts between the Trump campaign and Moscow, and then, of course, acknowledge that both members of the Trump campaign and the administration have been charged, many of them convicted, of lying to the FBI about those contacts with the Russians.
Jim Baker, let me get back to you because you know most of these players. One of the more energetic moments that Mueller had today was when he offered a very strong defense of his team of lawyers and FBI agents that he put together. Watch this.
You must be aware by now that 6 of your lawyers donated $12,000 directly to Hillary Clinton. I'm not even talking about the $49,000 they donated to other Democrats, just the donations to the opponent who was the target of your investigation.
Can I speak for a second to the hiring practices?
Sure.
We strove to hire those individuals that could do the job. I've been in this business for almost 25 years, and in those 25 years, I have not had occasion once to ask somebody about their political affiliation. It is not done. What I care about is the capability of the individual to do the job and do the job quickly and seriously and with integrity.
What's your response, Jim?
Yeah, I thought that was a particularly strong moment, and I thought overall look, I mean, the Republicans have been trying to attack the investigation, the FBI investigation, the special counsel's investigation for a long time. I think that fell flat today. I think that line of attack from a variety of different folks on the committees just simply didn't get anywhere. So I was grateful to see him do that, and I think it was one of the finer moments of the day.
And that answer was one of the longest statements he made. I mean, he just did not talk that much. It was a lot of monosyllabic answers.
Imagine if he had had that amount of energy and the strength of his opinions when talking about some of the damning parts of the report. I think that's when a lot of people watch that and say, why didn't he do the same thing about the obstruction of justice charges? Why didn't he do the same thing about some of the evidence he built against the president? And for whatever reason, he just decided that was not his job. And I thought at times it just looked like he wasn't backing up his own report.
Everybody stand by, everybody.